All good? Okay. All right, so let's talk real-world hardening RHEL. So expectations typically, right? Everyone has SE Linux enforcing, raise their hand. SE Linux enforcing, quarter maybe, we'll be generous, a quarter. Reality, permissive or disabled. So if that is reality, what can we do to help secure our RHEL environments? So we're going to go through each one of these, a slide or two for everyone, but there's a number of things that you might be already doing this, or maybe you should think about doing this if you want to make the security folks at your company a little, a little happier. So first thing, I'm sure most people have some sort of a golden image, but very easy thing to do is just to reduce the amount of packages that are deployed. That's going to do two things for you. One, it's going to reduce your patching window because you're not patching packages that are not being used. A lot of times when you install a package, especially if you're new to RHEL or Linux, you kind of just start installing things, and some of the services just automatically start, and you never even need them, but now they're listening, and now you've increased your attack vector. So one easy thing is just reduce, only install what you actually need to install. So that could be an app-based install, and then determine what you need for applications and add those later. Another thing that we've seen a number of actual attacks is via the third-party packages or packages that you're building in-house. You are getting them from some repository somewhere, and then you're building them, and then you're installing them. So one thing that RHEL can do is it can leverage GPG enforcing. So when you go to install a package with DNF or RPM or satellite, it will only install that package if it has a known good GPG signature. So one thing you can do if you want to install packages outside of the RHEL repository that, again, those are GPG signed by Red Hat, but maybe you're getting them from Apple, or maybe it's, developer Bob across the hall has given you this awesome RPM. Well, maybe you should come up with a company-wide GPG signature and then go through the effort of signing every RPM that you either build yourself or you get from a third party. Sign that so you've done your quote-unquote due diligence, and it will now only officially be installed on systems that have that GPG key, and that you then will, it's already been imported and will validate that. So if you're building RPMs, you can edit that with the RPM inside the RPM macro file by adding the signature GPG. And then when you build your package, you can add a signature, and then you can also check signatures from the command line to validate that GPG key works. Again, if you're leveraging satellite will enforce all this for you once you upload the your GPG key that you want it to check against. And then on the server, right, you can import that GPG key from the command line or through satellite as well. Another thing, again, this might be more for the newbies, but just disable things that you don't need. So check config is the old way that we managed running services back in the RHEL 5 and RHEL 6 days. Once we kicked off with RHEL 7, 8, and 9, we moved over to systemd and systemctl. But in this example, right, we can do a check config list all of the daemons or services that are going to run, what run level they're going to run on, and then you could disable them. So if you don't need cups running, let's turn it off, right? So there was that big cups vulnerability that popped around here recently. So if you didn't have cups running, you would not have been vulnerable. I think in RHEL 6, cups was on by default for some reason. So in RHEL 7 and newer, you would use systemctl list unit files. Again, that's going to list all the unit files and when they're going to start up. So you can disable cups. You can also mask a unit file. So masking gives you almost like 2 levels of protection because it won't, you have to unmask it to first enable it. So it gives you a second layer of kind of defense. So again, disable all services you're not using to decrease that attack vector. This too might be for the newbies, but do you really need to run in a fully graphical mode, run level 5 on your server, which will then require a full graphical user interface? Maybe you do. Maybe you're using some sort of application that has an interface that requires a full user interface, and then you would need to run level 5. But a lot of servers typically will run and run level 3. So one way to check that, again, on the older systems, you would type run level. On anything newer than 7, you would do systemctl get default. There are other levels as well, but most commonly are 3 and 5. So you can also change that at the config within a config file. So for RHEL 6 and newer, or 6 and older, it's the etc init tab file, and that'll show you what run level to boot up into. And then for systemd, you can set default multi-user target or set default graphical. So that'd be level 3 and level 5. So again, level 3 is user mode with networking, and level 5 would be a full display manager as well as user mode and networking. So again, do you need the display manager? Can you get by with just having the X11 libraries and then VNCing in? If you are VNCing in, are you doing that over the clear, or should you be doing some sort of port forwarding with SSH? So you are now protecting your VNC session as you connect to systems. Is everybody using host-based firewalls, or do we just not care about host-based firewalls? Hands up for host-based firewalls, yay, nay? Couple, 1, 2, all right. So host-based firewalls, IP tables was the technology that RHEL 6 and older used. And it was a host-based firewall that you could manage either from a command line or you could build a configuration file. There was also a really nice tool called System Config Firewall, which was a TUI, text user interface, where you could go in and select what ports needed to have access and turn on. And again, it would generate a fairly complex bunch of lines to generate that IP tables rule set. But in this example, all these lines, all they do is allow port 22 to come into that server and reject everything else. So in RHEL 7 and newer, we came out with Firewall D, which is a front end to IP tables, which we then changed out when we went to RHEL 8 and 9 to NF tables, which is a newer version or a better flavor of host-based firewall. So Firewall D is very easy. You can use more of a kind of human words to describe what you're trying to do. So much easier to use. You don't necessarily need a GUI or a web interface or a text user interface to build out your rule set, and it's much easier to deploy and to make changes to. Sudo tables, again, privilege escalation. You probably don't want to be logging in as root everywhere, so you have the mechanism within RHEL to leverage sudo tables. For those that are new, you certainly don't want to go edit the etc sudoers file directly. You want to use a tool called vi-sudo, and that will do some protection and locking and making sure that multiple people aren't in there making changes at the same time. So basically, you set your user or a group up to decide what type of commands they can run. You can use aliases and some variables to, again, generate lists of specific commands. You can have them again, be able to do all the commands or very specific commands to reduce what they need to be able to do. And then anything that is done in sudoers is logged in the varlog secure file, so you can see when people run things or try to run things if they don't have the right permissions. TCP wrappers is another tool that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. It's a little more old school, but it is still another layer that you can leverage. And it's basically a white and a black list configuration option where you can configure what hosts are allowed to connect to a specific service if it has the TCP wrappers library linked into it. So there's a host allow and a host deny. Very straightforward as to defining what the service can and can't do, and who can connect to it. And you can even write rules like accept for certain specific hosts. Again, all of those commands and actions are logged in var log secure. If you have a daemon and you don't know, or you want to make sure that it actually does enforce TCP wrappers, or TCP wrappers is enforced, you can do an LDD, which is list the dynamic libraries that are associated with that daemon, and then grep for wrap, short for the libwrap or the TCP wrapper library that is used. And if that shows up, you know that that daemon or that service has TCP wrappers library linked it to it, and then it will enforce those hosts allow and host deny file. Telnet, I guess, is still around. It is obviously clear text. So if you must or have some sort of requirement to use Telnet to connect to some older system, if you can, at least try to protect the credential handshake, which can be done by leveraging a Kerberos realm. Obviously, it's not going to encrypt the data flow back and forth, but it will at least protect your credentials going over the wire with Kerberos. USB Guard is a tool that came out in RHEL 7. It is a daemon that can run that will let you blacklist or whitelist any sort of USB device that's plugged into your server or laptop or desktop. So again, it's the USB Guard package. When you, to actually create your initial policy, the easiest way is to plug in any USB devices that you want on the whitelist, plug those in so the kernel sees it, and you can do USB Guard generate policy, and anything that's physically plugged into that server will be built into the policy as a automatically in the whitelist. And then you can see here that I've got a keyboard and a mouse that are plugged in. They are now on the allow whitelist. So if anything, once you've generated that policy and enforced that policy, nothing else other than those two that have the allow will be recognized by the kernel. So USB Guard generate policy, pipe that to your rules config file, and then start your service. That will now enforce all of the black and the white lists. So here, again, we can see that the Dell keyboard is allowed in. What happens if we want to allow a device that was previously blocked? So we can do USB Guard list devices, grep for Dell. We can see it got blocked. If we want to allow that from going further, maybe we got a new keyboard replacement or a different manufacturer, we could do USB Guard allowed device number 7 because it's looking for the USB ID, and that will allow it. So if we want to reverse that, we want to block that mouse now, we can do a USB Guard block device number 8 because 8 is the ID for the device listed that we found when we did list devices. You can also use things like allow with interface equals 08.star.star, and that will let like all of like a subsection of type of devices in, or you can also block things. So again, there's a lot of options you can do with the rule file, kind of like regular expression as well as some of the asterisks. Anybody using AID for couple? Okay. So AID allows you to do intrusion detection based off of files directories being changed. So it's a framework, right, that you install. Once it's installed, you're going to have to initiate it. So you'd run aid-init. It's going to go through the default AID config file, which is pretty good for, I think, most people out of the box. It'll, generate checksums, look at the ACLs, permission ownership, generate a number of different hashes based on the rule set. So SHA-256. There's a bunch of different hashes that it will generate, and then builds this database. Once you build the database, it's going to actually, if it's your very first time, it's going to put a .new in it, and so we need to move the .new file to the regular file name, and then when we start up AID and we run AID check, it's going to check against our system database file that it had originally generated with the init command. And assuming nothing's changed, you're going to get the green light, and AID's going to come back and say, yeah, everything's looking good. Nothing's changed from the last snapshot that I did or from that initial configuration that I took. So if you wanted to go in and make changes, this is just a snippet of what the AID file looks like. But there are some variables that generate the type of rules that are then enforced. So you have a path, a rule, and then there's usually a comment that was going to explain what is going on. So for /boot, the normal rule will watch the directory. It'll use a 256 hash, and it's also looking for extended content like extended ACL. So if the directory changes, permissions, or I'm sorry, the hash changes, it's going to notify you, and AID will let you know. So again, based on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to watch for, you have a lot of different rules that you can build off of that. In this example, right, you're going to run AID check probably on a cron job, hourly, daily, something like that. And when it identifies something that has tripped based off the rule, it's going to alert, and then you would have to look at the log file or generate an email back to yourself. So here we can see that the size of resolve.conf actually reduced, as well as the checksum change. So we know some sort of change happened. If that was supposed to happen, it's a false positive, and you can then just run AID update. It'll re-update the checksums into the database, and then if you run AID check again, it's going to be A-OK, and you're good. So, tool you can use to just make sure files are not getting changed. Crypto policies are a way holistically to change all of basically your security posture when it comes to algorithms and hashes across all the different programs that are using it. So instead, in the past, before crypto policy, you would have to go into OpenSSL, Postfix, Apache, and if you wanted to make any sort of tweaks, like I don't want TLS 1.1 anymore, you have to go find all those config files everywhere and do all that change manually. With crypto policies, you can do it in one spot, and it knows where to go find and do it all. So there's 4 policies that ship, and then of course you can build your own custom one. There's the legacy one for folks that need compatibility with RHEL 6 and earlier, or other OSs that just are still using some of the older algorithms and hashes. So you could use legacy. Default is the secure setting for current threat model, so that's what ships out of the box and what we would hope that you can run off of. If you're super secure conscious and you want to try to go with future, you can run future. There are a lot of applications that will break because, again, you're at the tip of the spear with the latest and greatest algorithms, and certain applications aren't quite there yet. And then there's FIPS, which conforms to the FIPS 140 requirements. And like I said, there's also an option for custom. So I see a lot of people building custom, which is a blend, ends up being a blend between default and legacy because everybody has some sort of legacy app out there. How do you change your policies? You can run the update crypto policy show to see what policy you currently have. Update crypto policy set, and the policy name will change it. You will have to do a reboot to guarantee all of the policies get changed. And then one of the most common options I see is a lot of third parties, when you get their RPM package, they've been built with a SHA-1 in the that's the algorithm or the hash they use in the RPM build, instead of the new standard, which I believe is SHA. It's either 512 or 256. So if you have a vendor that is giving you an RPM package for RHEL 9 and you are running the default crypto policy and you try to install their package, it will not install. So a workaround is to use default :SHA-1, which basically re-enables the SHA-1 hash so that those legacy packages can still be installed until they are rebuilt. So hopefully you don't have to do that for too long, but it is a nice little workaround. Anybody run into that? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Cisco? Yeah. NBDE, network bound disk encryption. So a lot of people need and require disk at rest encryption. With RHEL, you can use LUX, which is the way to encrypt a disk, a partition, a file. Of course, when you do that, it asks for a password. So when you think about at server scale, if you were to reboot your server, 100 servers, you're not going to want to sit there and type a password into every one of those to do that. Obviously, you could store that password on the disk and get around it that way. But here is a way in which you can actually have a kind of like a public key server for LUX. It's called NBDE, network bound disk encryption. There's two components. There's the Clevis framework, which is the client, and there's the Tang server, which is the certified or certificate server. So first thing you need to do is install Tang on probably more than one server. So here we're installing it on 2. It actually listens on port 80. Again, it's using public key encryption, so it doesn't really matter that it's port 80. It's sending the public key back and forth, which will go in clear text, but it's not a big deal. You can change that port if you, for some reason, you're going across zones and maybe 443 is the only one open. You could change that in the file tangd.socket if you wanted to force it to listen to another port. So once you have Tang set up, you're going to need to first create your LUX volume. So you can do that with crypt setup, verify password. We're doing a LUX format, and then you give it a block device. It's going to, of course, warn you that it's going to, scramble everything and encrypt everything. So you're going to lose things. Say yes, then you type your super secret password, and now you have your LUX volume. Now that you have your LUX volume, though, you need to mount it. So you can do a crypt setup LUX open. That's going to tell LUX to actually open that device and give it a device mapper name. We're going to ask it to create a device map name called secret. It's going to ask for that password, Red Hat 2024. You can now do a ls dev mapper secret. Sure enough, we have our device is there, and we can create a file system on that with makeFS XFS, and then we can mount that. So we've mounted our LUX file system as /secret. We can do a df. We can see that we have, it just looks like a normal regular file system. If we want it to automatically boot up on reboot, we need to put a line into the etc crypt tab. So we'll echo secret and then the device none LUX into crypt tab, and then of course also in fs tab. So now when you reboot, fs tab will try to boot it. It gets kind of some hints off of crypt tab. It will try to boot that or mount that device. Since it doesn't know the password, it'll sit there and prompt you for that password until you type it in. Well, we want to fix that. So what we do is on that server, we install the Clevis framework, which there's Clevis, Clevis LUX, and Clevis Dracket. And then we want to make sure our server can actually see the Tang advertisement. We can do a curl, which is just going to do like a wget off of a specific file. It's just going to give us a bunch of hexadecimal information. That's good enough. That's telling us that we are getting information from the server. Our client can talk to the key server. So now what we need to do is we need to bind or assign a key slot from the Tang server into our LUX. So what we need to do on the Clevis side is we need to bind LUX. So we run Clevis bind LUX, the device, and then Tang is the type of binding that we're going to do. There are other bindings you can do, like a YubiKey or TPM device. Here we're trying to connect to an actual Tang server. So Tang, the URL, it'll come back with the signing key. Yes, I want to apply that. It will ask for the original LUX password because it needs to actually open and put in a key slot. So it needs to make sure you have access into that LUX volume. So you'll type in that key just one time. And now you'll want to do that for the second Tang server because you want redundancy, because what happens if one Tang server is offline? You're rebooting, you want things to still work. So now we've bound 2 Tang servers to our LUX volume. And so if you were to, so now you want to validate that those key slots are taken. If you're using Lux V1, you would do a Lux Meta Show device, and it'll show you the 8 key slots and what is assigned into each of those key slots. If you're using version 2, which is the default now, you can do crypt setup Lux Dump, and that'll show, I believe V2 can hold up to 32 key slots. So you can have up to 32 keys that will unlock that Lux volume. So that's great for key rotation, having some secret super admin has a Lux password in the vault that overrides everything else. You can do that as well. So now what we need to do is, if you are encrypting your boot volume, you need to do one more step. You need to tell the init RAMFS that it needs networking at the very earliest stages of boot. So you pass in the rd.neednet equals 1, regenerate your init RAMFS. When your system boots up, it'll say, oh, I need networking right away before I even really get into the rest of the kernel. It's going to request a DHCP IP address to then go find the Tang server to unlock. So if you're not, unfortunately, if you're not running DHCP in your environment, that won't work for you. So you got to do another step if you're all static. And that step is you have to build your DRAKit and specifically put in a static IP address for your server. So when it initially boots up, it has a legitimate IP address on your network that it can phone into your Tang server. So that's for root. Root volumes require two extra steps. Yep. I'm pretty sure you can. I would guess, I would think you can. Probably within the arguments, you can specifically, I would think you would be able to specify that. Yeah. Yep. Good question. So if you are only encrypting the data volume and you don't really care about the boot volume, then all you need to do is system enable Clevis Lux AskPass. And so when it boots up and it mounts that data volume that has been encrypted with Lux, it'll say, oh, okay, it's encrypted. It'll come up and it'll sit there and ask for you to interact with it. But this daemon will see that, oh, it's asking for a password. I'm going to now look at the bindings and say, oh, okay, there's 2 Tang servers that it's been bound to. I'm going to phone into one of the Tang servers, get the key, unlock it, and then your data volume will automatically mount. All of the logs for Tang and NBD are in var log messages. Of course, you could separate those out if you wanted to, but it'll show connecting and posting the different connections. SSH dehardening, this used to be more of an issue in earlier versions of RHEL. I think later versions of RHEL, some of the defaults are more legitimate, but in case you're running some older versions, just things to look at, right, is the server key bit depth, right? You probably don't want 1024 anymore. 4096 is probably a good one to start with. You can specifically allow users, allow groups, depending on what you're trying to do. Again, a lot of people use Active Directory or IDM to help enforce this, but if you're kind of doing it straight from, if you're not leveraging any sort of authentication central server, you would want to make sure that the specific users and groups are in there. You probably don't want to allow root to log in, so you can change that to no. Maybe you're changing the retries or the timeouts or how many sessions. You probably don't want X11 forwarding. You can set that off by setting that to no for global. But then maybe there are some users or groups that you do want specific things to be acceptable. You can match that user or that group and then have very specific options for, again, a very specific user. So maybe I do need X11, but everybody else doesn't. So if I match my user, I get the X11 forwarding, but nobody else does. SSH logs are all in var log secure. So again, logs are important to look at. There's also audit D, Etsy audit D. So by default, audit D now is running. I think in RHEL 7 it was you had to turn it on, but RHEL 8 and 9, it's default. So again, audit D is a great log to look at to see what's going on, successes, failures, start to do some correlation, what happened, something succeeded or something failed. You can look at that. And then I'm sure a lot of people are doing some sort of central logging, probably to a third party tool like Splunk. But if maybe you're a small shop, you don't have the budget for a Splunk solution or a centralized third party, it's very easy to turn an existing RHEL server into a log collector. So you can you can modify the RSys log daemon and let it accept connections for basically to centralize your logging. One thing you're probably going to want to do is create a remote log template where you're using like a hostname variable, so that when server A dumps its logs and server B dumps their logs, they're not all in one log file, they're broken out, so you can have easy access to go track things down and look into things. So that's how you would set it up on a central server. On all your remote servers, you need to now tell where's that central server going. So you're going to need to edit your 50-default config file in rsyslog, or you can probably also edit, depending on what server you're on or what RHEL release you're on, it also might be the rsyslog config file. But here we're just showing you that all of the info level messages are going to go to the IP address that you would specify in there. :514 is the TCP port that it's going to, and that will then send all of those logs that meet the star.info level. They'll send them over the wire to that central logging server. An easy way to test to make sure everything's set up, you can just from the command line type logger and then some sort of a catchphrase, and that should go to your central logger. So again, separation of duties is important when you're trying to lock things down. So SE Linux in itself is an hour conversation, but again, just high level, what is SE Linux? How is it different than file permissions? So file permissions are direct access control, right? Read, write. And then SE Linux is mandatory access controls. There's a number of options that you can select within SE Linux, from Boolean files to ACLs. And those not only affect files, but processes as well. So there's just so much more you can do with SE Linux to enforce. So again, at a very high level, to turn SE Linux back on, you would edit the etc sysconfig SE Linux, turn that onto either permissive or enforcing. If you had been running it in disabled mode, you need to touch .auto relabel and reboot your system. And when it reboots, it'll see that .auto relabel, and it now needs to touch every single file and make sure that the SE Linux context is set correctly, which is stored in the extended attributes. So it needs to go through that. If you've got a huge file system, that will take time. So plan accordingly. And then once that's done, you should be able to have SE Linux start enforcing your system. A couple of tools, again, like I mentioned, there's this notion of a Boolean file. A Boolean file turns on or off a capability. It's kind of like a little bit of a shortcut to enable a specific feature or a common feature within an application. Very common ones are things that you would turn on and off around Apache or Samba. So again, we're trying to give you these ways to turn things that may be less secure on through a Boolean option, and then SE Linux kind of protects everything at the edge. There are tools like audit to allow and SE module, which lets you get information from the config file and write specific SE Linux allow rules for maybe a third-party application that doesn't have SE Linux rules. And again, all those error logs show up in audit.log. All right, we're almost there. So hardening passwords, again, if you're integrating with Active Directory or any sort of IDM, that's the place that you would do this. But if you're not, and you just have a handful of systems and they're kind of running independent, you may want to, because of security policy in your company, you may want to go in and specifically change the requirements for minimum length, complexity of password, things like that. So you can do that in the etsy-pam system auth file. And then a tool that you, has anybody used Nmap? Oh, good. Almost everybody. So for those who haven't used Nmap, it's a great tool to self-scan your system to validate what you think is protected, or what's being presented is there. So it's a great tool to use. So yeah, Nmap's a great tool. And then from a security perspective, right, we offer a number of training courses. I believe these are all paid for. Just to throw a handful out, a couple of them are around the Red Hat certified administration, and then there's some that are specific to security. The 415 class is brand new. That one just came out less than 6 months ago. So I'm actually looking forward to taking that one. Anyone taken any of these courses? Couple? Yep, good. And that's what I have. Any questions? Anything not that I didn't go over that people would recommend?
Does Etsy Linux help with Podman?
Yeah, it does. Podman is the container Docker replacement that runs your containers. So SE Linux, can protect those containers, tell it what storage it can access. C groups is the way to give certain applications or services different resources, and SE Linux can tie all into that as well. So yeah, absolutely. Yep. So for multi-tenancy, SE Linux is really a requirement. I mean, technically it's not, but anyone that wants to run a multi-tenant Kubernetes environment, virtual machines, SE Linux will save you a lot. And one thing that's interesting is, every so often there's that big vulnerability that everybody hears about, and everyone's like rushing to, okay, how do I patch it? What's the mitigation? I won't say 100%, but most of the time, the default SE Linux will have blocked whatever this vulnerability hack attempt is, even though it was not designed for it. It just, the default protection is enough, again, most of the time. I'm sure there's some exceptions. So it's just a great extra safety net. So I'd highly encourage you guys to look at deploying that if you can, especially public-facing systems.
I was just curious, how many people use SE Linux on by default or off? We use permissive.
So permissive, who uses it enforcing? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So
switching to enforcing is if you've got apps that don't work when you turn it on to enforcing.
You want to run permissive first.
I've done this. I've run permissive first.
Yep.
Turn it to enforcing. The app will break, but you'll get helpful information from, I can't remember where it is, but you'll get very
audit to allow is the tool that we'll go find, and then you can build your rules.
Exactly what I did in a couple cases. So it's not a ton of work.
It isn't. Yeah. I mean, it's work, but it's not. It's worth the effort, in my opinion.
It was for me.
Yeah.
I got my security team off of it.
Yeah. Adam.
Just to piggyback on that, I was the same kind of question. Like, are we doing it at scale? You have 100 boxes? You have 3,000 boxes? Because I'd love to do it, but I've got too many servers. So.
We have 200 servers.
Okay. Okay. We have like hundreds and hundreds of different applications. Where I'm like, yeah, we're all going to break it a different way.
Right.
Manpower to track down.
Yeah.
So how many users have access to this?
Thousands plus.
The users is the problem.
Yeah. And also homegrown apps or apps that are 30 years old or whatever.
And that's what happens for our company that was that for.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Transitioning from environment we don't have. That is a lot.
Even when enforcing by default, it's kind of like, hey, I've got a new application to install, and then like if it's on, it might take the app team.
Yeah.
wonderful, it is great for security, but it has been a pain in the ass sometimes when just randomly things do not behave as I expected. And eventually I find, oh, I see what I messed with it.
Yeah.
We have enough app teams that come to us like, hey, we're trying to install something, and our official install document from the vendor that we pay money for, they said step 1 is disable SE Linux.
Yeah.
Can you do that? And I'm like, it's already disabled, don't worry. I'm
Sure.
like,
I know.
how do you even deal with that?
I know. Yeah, I think when you're at scale, you need to get someone on the security team to get buy-in and understand the value that it could bring, and almost get them to help be the champion. And so then when a new app comes out or the existing app, right, there's got to be this level, especially if you've been around a long time, you've got a ton of RHEL and a lot of apps, you're probably going to have to start them all in permissive mode, and there's going to be a level of effort. Every single app, you need to have some security owner. He's going to watch the logs for months, build these rules, and see those errors slowly go down to 0. And then once they're at 0, then you would kick them over to enforcing. But yeah, it would be an effort for sure. Not well. I mean, we've got the audit to allow that'll convert the logs to rules. Yeah. You got something.
Any plans for zero trust firewall management?
Zero trust file. I don't know.
So right now you're managing individual servers.
Yeah.
Where some code has to be managed to control which firewalls are, but our company, they're implementing guarding port.
Yeah.
As admins, we hate it because 2 in the morning something breaks, you have no idea that it's this application.
Sure.
Network access. So if we had some of that control, we would know, okay, it's this being blocked because usually we don't have SSH access from a Windows machine to this specific server. So
Right.
you know, there's something off going on.
Yeah.
Many of Red Hat has something to.
Yeah. Is Mike Savage? Are you in the room? No. You're talking about it in the next presentation? Okay, perfect. Stay tuned. Yeah. All right. Any other?
So I might have missed was fail to ban ever mentioned?
It actually wasn't good. So are you using fail to ban?
Oh, constantly.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was maybe like a more enhanced solution, because there are certain circumstances where I would rather have a carpet rather than a deny.
Sure. I don't know. Is fail to ban actually? I don't think fail to ban actually is an RPM we ship. We have a new one called a FA policy, which is a whitelist, blacklist for processes. And so I missed that one, and so my next version of the slide, I'll put that in.
And one more thing.
Yeah.
Is it possible to get this slide deck just so I can review it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send it out to everybody.